Are you starting to learn Norwegian? That's a great idea actually, because you will get two languages for free, Danish and Swedish. These three languages are so similar to each other that we could talk about dialects of the same language. The Norwegians actually have a joke. They say there's just one Scandinavian language, but the people in Sweden don't know how to write it and the people in Denmark don't know how to speak it. So yeah, don't tell people in Sweden and Denmark about that, but that actually summarizes the situation quite well. The reason why these are even separate languages is political and historical. I've made a separate video about that. If you're interested in it, watch it. But basically Norwegian is a little bit in the middle between these two. But unfortunately, there is one thing that's a bit weird about Norwegian, and that is that it has two written variations. Why that is so is a long story. There's also a separate video on that. But fortunately, nowadays, there is one of the two variations, bokmål, which is used by about 90% of the population. So it's totally fine to just learn bokmål, which, by the way, is very similar to written Danish, and skip nynorsk, the other variation, which is not so popular any longer. But now I'd say, without further ado, let's get started. As an introduction, I want to show you a text that is way too difficult, but don't worry. The idea is just to give you an impression of what the Norwegian language sounds like, how it's written, how the written language corresponds to the spoken language. And the idea is just for you to listen to the text, read along, try to see, can you maybe understand something? Do you notice something in particular? I'll go through a few things after you have listened to the text, but maybe you can also share in the comments what you find interesting about this experience. Don't worry if the text is way too difficult, if you don't understand it, it doesn't matter. That's not the idea. I just want to give you a little impression of what Norwegian actually sounds like.
Ernas drøm. En mann kommer langs veien. En turist? Nei, Erna kjenner mannen. Han smiler. Det er mannen fra stasjonen. Hun smiler også. Mannen går forbi. Hun roper etter ham, men han hører ikke. Han forsvinner. Adressen. Hun må skrive adressen. Hvor er adressen? Nå ser hun tre personer. En gutt. Han spiser sjokolade. Ei dame. Hun gir ei bok til en mann. Erna tenker, nei, ikke spis sjokoladen. Ikke gi ham boka. Erna våkner. Hun må le. Men hun tenker, hva med adressen?
Okay, so the thing that you see at first glance, fortunately, Norwegian uses the Latin alphabet. They write the language just like we do in English, so that's a big relief. However, there are a few weird letters, like this O that has the this line through it, or the A with the little circle on top of it. Actually, there is a third one, which is this one, the A. The A is, I think, the easiest for English speakers to pronounce. It's just like and or as, it's the same sound. And this is actually an O. The A with the circle on top of it is an O, like very dark and very closed O, 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 O. This O with the line through it is a letter that does not exist in English. It's called Ö. And you might know it from German. In German, they write it with two dots, or you might know it from French. In French, they write it as an EU, like in the color blue. They would say bleu, for example, in French. But if you've neither learned French nor German or another language where this letter occurs, then it's not really helpful. But on this channel, you will also find a video on how to pronounce this letter. And I think that's a thing you should do if you're not familiar on how to pronounce it. We have another sound in the Norwegian language that we write with the letter U, and that is U. And that's also a sound that does not exist in English, and you will have to learn it, unfortunately. So I'm linking all these pronunciation videos in the description. You don't need to watch them now. You can watch them after having done the little mini course, because for now, I would say that the focus should be on understanding and seeing how the language works. Then you can look a little bit closer at how to produce the different sounds of the language. So as you can see, this U is usually pronounced as an U, and the O is sometimes pronounced as an O, just like this one, and sometimes it's pronounced as an U. And U is about the sound that you have when you start saying a W, like in English when you say what, and like the sound at the beginning of the W is a letter U. But usually it's just pronounced as an O, so that's also quite simple. Now, another thing you might have noticed is that there are actually a lot of words that you will understand, like dröm. What could that mean? Well, dream, right? It's just one letter that is different. En man, a man, kommer, comes, turist, a tourist, smiler. It's just the pronunciation is different. Stationen, också, sounds like also, and it means the same, and so on. So you see a lot of words are actually really, really similar. And the reason is that Norwegian is a Germanic language, so it has a lot of words from German and also from English, and it had a big influence even on the English language, because during the Viking times, the Vikings used to attack England many times, and they brought their language. Many modern English words are actually from Viking languages, meaning from ancient Norwegian language. So therefore, Norwegian is actually much easier than you might think at first glance, because once you see a little bit more into it, you will find a lot of words that are really, really similar and that are therefore also easy to remember. If you by chance speak Dutch or German, it's even easier for you, because there is even more words that are in common with these languages. But I guess maybe, and feel free again to comment in the chat, if you in the comments, if you understood some of this text. So you might get a little bit of a glimpse. So it's a dream. It has two pictures. The first is this meeting with the man from the station, and he smiles, but there is something with the address. She has to write the address. You might not deduct this word skrive, which means write, but it comes actually from Latin, and it's also in German. You would say schreiben, which is very similar. And then there's the other picture of the dream, where there's several people and they're doing things, and she doesn't like what they're doing. She says ikke, it means not, don't do that. So yeah, so for some reason the picture shifts here, and then she wakes up and she laughs, but she thinks, what about the address? Okay, you can see here våkner. I think if you don't know it, you would not guess that it means to wake up, but once you know it, you see the similarity again. And ler and laughs, well, that's also a bit difficult to deduct. Of course, you cannot know unless I tell you, but I hope this has given you a little bit of an idea of what the Norwegian language sounds like. And also that there are really a lot of words that are quite similar. And even if we don't deduct them right away, it is still easier for us to remember them when we know that there is a similarity. Now, before I go on this mini course, I'd like to invite you to check out my Norwegian course that is actually based on the story around Erna. She is one of the main characters in it, and that's a course that takes you from absolutely zero all the way up to B2 if you want to. And I teach you the entire pronunciation, the entire grammar, everything on video. There's tons of interactive exercises, so we really look at every aspect of the language. But the special thing is that the red thread is always the story. So if you're tired of boring dialogues or mechanical apps where you're just learning random phrases, this will keep up your motivation. If you want to know how the story ends, there is no other way than to learn Norwegian. So check it out in the description. I think you might be interested in it, but that's it for the advertisement. Now let's dive into the Norwegian language a little bit more. And I'd like to invite you to look at the first little text of this story beyond the prologue that we're now going to put aside a little bit, this dream that Erna had. And we're going to look at a small dialogue between Erna and her daughter. And now I invite you actually to really follow along and to try to understand every single word. So there is a word list now, and you can download this word list below the text. And I'd like to invite you to maybe even print it out or put it on your tablet or in your phone or somewhere, so that when you now read along and listen to the text, you will be able to understand how actually the language works and what you're going to learn. So I'd like to invite you to listen to the text, read along, and maybe come back to this position in the video, do this 2 or 3 times, and try to understand actually what is being said with the help of the word list, and then we're going to look at it together.
Erna, hva gjør du?
Jeg lager en gave til Susanne. Hun har bursdag.
Hva det?
Det en nisse.
Jeg forstår ikke. En nisse?
Ja, Susanne trenger en liten venn. Derfor lager jeg en nisse.
Erna sitter og arbeider. Nå hun nesten ferdig.
Okay, so how did that go? Feel free to share in the comments whether it was easy or difficult, or if there's something you didn't understand, but let's look at it a little bit closer. I'd like to start with the pronunciation. The first thing that you might have noticed is, of course, these weird sounds, the Ö and the O. We've had them before, we've had the Ü before. And if you would want to try to read the text, which you can do now, I mean, you can read it and then compare with the recording whether your pronunciation matches the one on the recording. But then I'd suggest that you first look at how we pronounce these letters, and there is a link to that also below this video. But let's dive a little deeper into the pronunciation. The A is pronounced in the same way all the time, fortunately, and it is always like a very dark A, like in the word A, dark, right? Va, lager, har, bursdag, Susanne. It's always the same, unless, of course, it has this little ring on it, then we say Å. The E is basically never an E, with one exception that you're going to learn in a minute, but it's never an E like in English. It is an E like in Ben. Now, one thing that is quite cool is that there are a few letters that are not pronounced at all. If you look at the first sentence, hva gjør du? We don't pronounce the H, we don't pronounce the G. The Y, it's like a Y. We say Y, gjør du. And this continues. Hva det? Here, the T of this word det is not pronounced. Here, the word å, the G is not pronounced, and the same, the last word ferdig, the G is not pronounced. So it's easier than you might think. Some of the things you don't need to learn because they are just not pronounced. Another thing you might have noticed is that the RS is pronounced like a sh, so like in fish in English, or English, like this SH in English. In Norwegian, when we write this RS, in most Norwegian dialects, we say sh instead. Only in the southwest, like in Bergen, Stavanger, people would say bursdag, people would say forstår, but in Oslo and Trondheim and all the rest of the country, people say bursdag and they say forstår. The letter I is always pronounced like an I, so we say til, nisse, ikke, liten, sitter. Very simple. And one last thing about the letter E. Usually we pronounce it like in ben, but sometimes we actually pronounce it like an A. And that usually happens when we combine it with an R. So we don't say Erna, we say Erna, okay, with the mouth wide open. We also say derfor. This does not happen at the end of the word. So here we say sitter, and here we say trenger. But at the beginning of the word, we usually do that. And then we have one word that is completely irregular in its pronunciation, and that's this word I, and we say jeg. It's almost like in English, just that at the beginning also we have the y, jeg. So for some reason, we write it completely differently than we pronounce it. Yeah, I think these are the most important things of the pronunciation. I don't want to go into too much detail. I don't want to overwhelm you. Just to give you a basic idea of how the pronunciation works, what the system is, and what some of the most important sounds are. We're not going to cover all of these sounds here in this mini language course. That would be a little bit too much and would require too much practice. But for now, I think that's the most important things. Now, did you understand it? I think it's not so difficult, is it? Erna, what do you? And you see how simple Norwegian is. There is no like, what do you do? What are you doing? No, what do you? That's it. What is it? Hva det? That's it. That's very simple to make a sentence in Norwegian. Jeg lager en gave til Susanne. I make a gift for or to, we say til for some reason, Susanne. Okay, there is no difference between I make and I am making. So we have to get that out of the context, whether you're doing something right now or whether you do something regularly. Hun har bursdag, she has birthday. So it's her birthday. There is one thing you might notice, that we just say things sometimes in a different way. Like we wouldn't say she has birthday in English, although you understand what it means, but that's just how we say it in Norwegian. So when we learn another language, we usually cannot translate word by word. But yeah, we just learn these expressions. Hun har bursdag means it's her birthday. Okay, hva det? What is it? We said that it is a nisse. Nisse is a mythological creature in ancient Norwegian. These are small, people-like figures who sometimes help in the house and are nice, and sometimes they're a bit evil. And this nisse that she's making here, we don't know, is he going to turn out evil or nice, but this will become clearer in the rest of the story. Lisa says, jeg forstår ikke. She doesn't understand. And again, Norwegian is so super simple because you would just say, I understand not. That's it. Yeah, jeg forstår, I understand. Jeg forstår ikke, I understand not. I don't understand. So there is no reason to do something complicated like I do not, and then a verb, and no. You just add this ikke, and that negates the whole sentence. Very simple. And Nisse, okay, so she doesn't get it. And Erna says, yes, Susanne needs a little friend. And here you can see the similarity again to English, a little friend and liten venn. You can see that these words are a little bit, that they come from the same language family. Derfor lager jeg en nisse, therefore make I a nisse. And you can see here there's one weird thing about the grammar. Why don't we say derfor jeg as we would in English, right? Therefore I am making, or therefore I make well, the reason is that in Norwegian grammar, the verb is always the second piece of information that we get. So we start a sentence with anything, and then we have the verb, and then the rest of the sentence comes. So you don't need to memorize that, but just so you know how a Norwegian sentence works, if you make a mistake with it, Norwegians will of course understand what you want to say, it's not a big deal, but I'm just explaining to you how the Norwegian language functions. And well, then the summary of the text, Erna sitter og arbeider. Erna sits and works, which basically, I told you we don't have a form of saying she is working, but like sits ands, it somehow emphasizes this, that she is doing it right now. Nå hun nesten ferdig. Now is she almost finished. So you see the same principle again. The verb is the second piece of information you get. And therefore we have this weird word order in Norwegian. So I hope this text hasn't been too complicated for you. Just a little bit more grammar at this point. Let's talk about verbs and pronouns. Verbs are all the words that explain an activity, like to do, to go, to sleep, to love, to hate. All of these are verbs. And when you look at them in this text, gjør, lager, har, forstår, trenger, sitter, arbeider. you always notice that every single one of them ends in an R. And that's actually pretty cool because most Norwegian verbs do that. In the present tense, they just have the same ending. They have an R ending. And what is even cooler is that this R ending is the same for all persons, meaning completely regardless of who does something. And you don't have that in English. In English, you say, I do, but she does. I cannot say she do. Right? But in Norwegian, no, it's always the same, whether I or you or he or she or it and so on. It's always the same ending for every verb. And it's always here this R ending. So you would say jeg arbeider, du arbeider, han arbeider, hun arbeider, vi arbeider, dere arbeider, de arbeider. And by the way, this D is the only word in the Norwegian language where we write an E and pronounce it like E in English. Otherwise, we never do that. We would say it like in dere, or sometimes as this exception that I've told you, like in Erna, for example, where we would pronounce the E as an A, but otherwise that never happens. Okay, I think it's quite easy to understand the pronouns. There's one thing that this may be a little bit weird for you. We have two translations for you. If we're just talking to one person, then we say du. And if we're talking to several persons, then we say dere. You might know this principle from other languages, like in French, for example, you would say tu and vous. But if you don't, then that's just the difference. Du is when you're talking to one person. Dere is when you're talking to several persons. Okay, ready for a little challenge? Let's do a small exercise. Try to fill in a word into the gap, into these sentences. They're all from the text before, and maybe you remember them. So pause the video at this point, and in a few seconds, I'm going to show the solution to you. Okay, so that's basically the solution. Erna lager en gave til Susanne. Remember, it's lager, to make. Susanne har bursdag. We have this weird expression. That's how we say it is Susanne's birthday. We would say Susanne har bursdag. She has birthday. Det en nisse. Yeah, I think it's not so difficult. Lise forstår ikke. Look at this beautiful, simple negation in Norwegian. Just add the ikke and the whole sentence turns to not. Erna sitter og arbeider. And notice that we don't pronounce the G here. Hun nesten ferdig, and we don't pronounce the G here either. So if you want to do another exercise, here is a list of 4 sentences where the word order is completely wrong. So maybe you can try to pause the video and fix the word order. And this is the solution. Lise forstår ikke. Erna nesten ferdig. Susanne trenger en liten venn. And the last example is actually 2 sentences. Susanne har bursdag, og Erna lager en gave. And theoretically, of course, it could be the other way around. It could be Erna lager en gave, og Susanne har bursdag. But I just chose to put them into this order. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this mini course. I hope you've learned something, got a little bit of a grasp of what Norwegian is, how it functions, what it sounds like. If you're now interested in learning more, check out my channel. Feel free to share the channel also with your Norwegian learning friends, and check out my Norwegian course. The description is below. I'm happy to see you again soon.